everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Tonight, my guest is Mitch Korolev. Mitch is an environmental scientist and photographer who beautifully brings those two worlds together. His work has taken him from the wild landscapes of Alaska to the depths of the Amazon rainforest, and most recently to Western Colorado, where he's been savoring the incredible variety of landscapes now right outside his door. One of Mitch's goals is to use photography as a bridge between science and the public, helping turn complex research and walls of text into stories we can actually see, feel, and understand for the good of both our society and our planet. You can connect with Mitch through his website at korolevphotography.com. And if you're on Instagram, look for him at Mitch Korolev, and I will link those to the show notes below. In tonight's presentation, blending inspiration and information when photography meets science. Mitch will share how he uses photography to bridge the gap between science and public understanding. Through a series of landscape, wildlife, and scientific images, he'll walk us through the techniques, creative decisions, and visual storytelling approaches he uses to create photographs that either inform, inspire, or ideally do both. Mitch, welcome to the Happiness Hour.
Well, thank you so much, Linda, and thank you everybody for being here. Let me get my screen share.
Not so fast. Take it down. People get so excited to
Okay.
get to their presentation, but no, 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 sir. I'm going to tell a quick story. I met Mitch just about, was that 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago?
About
Um,
3 weeks.
yeah, so we were both participating. When I say participating, attending, I hosted a bunch of sessions for Out of Chicago. And at the end of the evenings, they have this thing called attendee takeover parties. I'm sorry, that's the party you were in, but they have like these takeover parties, and they're hosted by different photographers that were speakers during the day. And so the attendee takeover is my favorite thing that Out of Chicago does all weekend. And there are a lot of amazing speakers, and attendees are amazing as well. And so I'm in the room with the attendees, the takeover party. And, I'm drilling people because I can't stand a silent room. It's like everybody's just looking at each other on Zoom. Come on, talk. And Mitch is sitting there quietly, patiently, just kind of taking it in. And I'm like, dude, what's your story? And, Mitch was an attendee, and he wasn't part of the takeover presentation, but he was in there enjoying the party. And I don't think it took me 3 or 4 minutes. And he tells me a little bit about the photography he's doing. And then I'm looking at his Instagram and I'm like, dude, you've actually placed, your work is good enough to be in these landscape contests. And I don't know that you didn't place them in the top five or anything like that. But those contests, if you enter some of these large contests, there are thousands and thousands of entries. And you were in the what, top 200? Is that
Yeah.
what it was? Yeah. So this guy's sitting there like, oh, I've never held a camera. I'm like, no. So I'm scrolling through, and because most of you know who I am, I lurk and I stalk and I go straight to his website. I'm like, dude, I want you to come and talk. And I thought he would put up a fight, and he did not. So within just a couple of weeks, Mitch is here. So thank you for saying yes and giving up your Wednesday night to share what you know with this group.
Oh, now I'm blushing. Thank you for inviting me. That was such a nice intro.
All
Yeah.
right, with that, is there anything that you want to fill in about your bio? Because I don't know anything about you,
No, you did
really.
it better than I could. That was perfect. I'm gonna go back and listen to that and write it down word for word and use it later. That was like,
All right, I'll even give it to you. All right, with that, let's go ahead and get started, and so that you can Do your thing.
Well, hi everybody. I'm not going to give you the whole spiel because Linda did it so wonderfully. My name's Mitch. I like photography. I like science. Um, Please don't judge these photos. I take shockingly few photos of myself for somebody who calls himself a photographer. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about my background before diving in. Like Linda said, I'm an environmental scientist, but my main focus is plants. So usually I'm in a forest or in some cases on the tundra, if it's Alaska, looking at plants. I'd say second to plants, my next specialty is wilderness science. Most of my work happens like really deep in the middle of nowhere. So this photo on the left, I think that was like day 42 without a shower. Like you're just I was off the grid a lot. And concurrently, I also love photography, which I don't think I really need to explain to this particular group of people. I think that's preaching to the choir, but I love photography. I love that I'm able to um, spend so much time outside and get paid for it. But there's also some like pretty major issues with academic research. And once I figure out how I advance a slide, there we go. There's only a couple no photography slides, and then I promise we'll do some photos. But the main product of a lot of research is a research paper. And I wanted to read a couple quotes from a paper that I'm a co-author on, just to give you a flavor for what we're dealing with if you don't have a science background. So, eddy covariance systems were used to measure the net ecosystem exchange of CO2, latent heat flux, sensible heat flux, wind speed, and friction velocity. In one sentence, this paper managed to introduce six new acronyms or symbols without any further explanation. And I'm not even going to read this sentence on the right, but I just want you to know that that is one sentence in this paper. And there's symbols and acronyms aplenty in just one sentence. So while research is really important and we learn a lot through this process, we're not always the best at communicating this to people who don't want to read, pages and pages of this. And even if you did want to, a lot of these research papers are hidden behind a paywall. So you might actually have to pay money to then figure out what scientists are saying. I think this is a problem, especially for environmental science, where this is a thing that affects every single person on the planet. So why is it like this in research? There's a few main issues that can kind of be chalked up to people lack the money, the time, the interest, and the outlets to produce those sorts of scientific communication reports. And for some parts of research, that might not be a problem. If you're like a theoretical physicist, you might not need to shout what you find from the rafters every time. But when it comes to something like our planet, I think it's a little more important that we broadcast what's going on because to some degree, that's going to affect at least some people in the world, if not everybody. And so I think photography can help with certain parts of this research dissemination, making it more clear, more accessible, more engaging, and to an extent more emotional. So I'm going to start with the Amazon rainforest, which I lived there for about a month, following a group of climate scientists and their work in the forest. And I think the images I show you will hopefully help to visualize the environment, contextualize some of the research, and show some behind the scenes photos or processes that go on in research. So visualizing the environment is where I want to start. This is one of my favorite photos I took from the Amazon, and I took it on top of this really rickety tower that was like shaking in the wind, and I had my camera up like 200 feet in the air, but I think it ended up being worth it because I think this photo does a good job of introducing people to what this ecosystem felt like and looked like. Of course, there's the forest in the foreground, but I really like the rainburst on the horizon. It's called a rainforest for a reason, and it was important to me that that element of the ecosystem was included. I like the photo from an aesthetic point of view too. You've got like the orange in the sky with the sunset paired with the blue contrast. That's pretty nice. And if you look closely at the trees, some of them are moving a little bit. It was quite windy that day. So to me, there's a sense that this is a very lively, moving place. And I think that holds up for the Amazon. When we think about like main areas of research in the Amazon, one of the big thing that is a recurring theme is deforestation. People are really worried about it, and I think for good reason, because the Amazon shrinks a decent amount each year, especially due to agriculture. People cut down or burn the forest in order to make space for more cropland. And so I hope none of you are actually the owner of this farm because I really wasn't supposed to do this, but I went a little bit into the farm because I really wanted to get this photo of the desiccated soybeans right behind, or pardon me, right in front of the forest. And I think this photo does a really good job of sort of connecting this concern about deforestation in a visual package, like this dried out soybean field and the foreground is, I think, really, really strikingly different from the lush forest in the background. And I had this really nice leading line in the foreground with this gap in the cropland that drags you all the way back to that really tall tree. I think that itself can tell a little bit of a story with the fact that there is organization in the croplands, whereas the forest is a lot more chaotic and unkempt. One of the main things we were studying while we were in the forest was how pesticides and fertilizers from farmlands move throughout the river systems. So a cloudburst like this will fall over a farmland, and if there's been any sort of pesticide or fertilizer application, that fertilizer is going, and those pesticides will get pulled into the rivers, and those will travel. We actually don't know how far into these other forested ecosystems. If you're reading a scientific paper, you're probably not going to get any of that landscape imagery, and you're definitely not going to get these animal imagery either. This is a great kiskadee. This is one of my favorite birds that I found in the Amazon that I encountered. Very loud, raucous birds. And I don't think it would have been a complete trip without a few tarantula sightings. This one, thankfully, was in the forest. I had a couple turn up by my bed and in my shoes, which was a little less fun. But we'll pick this one for this talk. This is a tapir. I'd never seen one before going. I think they're native and endemic to South America. I found this image to be particularly striking because these guys are forest dwellers. They're not agriculturally incentivized. So this this tapir was um, on his way to a different patch of forest, and in order to get there, he had to cross through some of this new habitat that isn't really suited to him. Now, the big problem for him is that if there's a jaguar who's lurking on the edge of one of these forests, he's a really easy target in between the chunk of forest that he's leaving and the chunk of forest that he's going to. And I think you can see it a little bit in this image. It's that sort of smudge on the horizon is the next patch of forest. So quite a ways to walk for that guy. And then lastly, for animals at least, this is a caiman that hung out around one of our research sites. A lot of our research had to do with water. So we were making him mad on a daily basis because we would disturb his hunting spots. Now, already, I feel like with those landscape and animal photos, you guys have a better idea of what went on in the Amazon rainforest than people who read the papers that were produced. Papers, while they're very important, they don't always have the largest scope when it comes to what they talk about and how they disseminate that information. So it's really important, I think, to be able to visualize that place because I think inherently when you're able to visualize something like that, it becomes more personal and more real. But it's not just about visualization. Photos can also help contextualize scientific methods and results. Here, myself and two fellow scientists were in this boat on a man-made reservoir just on the edge of the forest. And farmers like to use these reservoirs because they're always concerned about drought. If there's a drought, they lose their croplands. It's really smart to have some sort of external water source that they can draw upon in an emergency. And it's also very pretty. It's a lovely day when you get to go out on one of these reservoirs, but they're not particularly natural to the surrounding ecosystem. This would normally be a river that's free flowing. Instead, when this water sits here, all sorts of like plant material builds up in this reservoir. And over time, that plant reservoir or that those plants decay and they release a chemical compound called methane. Oh, I see the question. Yes, this is the Brazilian Amazon. Yes, it's the Cerrado area in Mato Grosso, Brazil. Good question. Thank you. So, when we're on these man-made reservoirs, we're really looking at methane that's being released from them. There's tons of these reservoirs all over the edge of the Amazon, and we don't really quite understand how much methane that they release into the atmosphere. And greenhouse gases, they warm the earth. So that's the main reason we're looking at them in particular. What my colleague Marcia is doing in this photo is she's drawing up water from the reservoir into this vial. But in that water, at a molecular level, there's gas molecules that hide in between the water molecules. And we can send that to a lab and they can analyze how much methane is in that vial. And after you take a certain number of samples, you can begin to extrapolate how much methane is this releasing over time. That's one of the big things that we were working on. That whole process of going out on the boat and getting those samples takes a long time. It's a lot of energy. It's a lot of money, not only to just take them, but then to process them, analyze that data, write the reports. It's quite a long process. So one of our other projects while we were there is wondering if we could automate that process so that something could collect that data for us and we don't have to go every single day out on the reservoir to get more samples. And that's what this strange contraption is here in front of the green boat. And here's another view of it. This thing automatically samples the methane content in these reservoirs. So methane will get trapped underneath this platform, either in the red funnel that's underwater or on the clear cube on the other side of the platform. And all of that methane gas gets sampled inside of this orange box, um, the magical box. It's really just a sensor that has the ability to tell how much methane is passing through the box. So over time, this will sample continuously every single day, and it saves scientists a lot of time so long as it's successful. So maybe once a week or once every other week, scientists will come out, they'll grab the data off of the circuitry, and then we can plug that in to our analysis, and it saves a lot of money and a lot of time. And this whole situation, this whole platform is very cheap to produce too. So this was a major breakthrough. Recently, the paper got published, and it was a pretty big success. So people have started to reuse this model in other ecosystems too, not just the Amazon. This is Zoe, a friend of mine, and also the genius behind these contraptions. Even if I didn't give you all of that background about what they're doing and why they're doing it, I still think that this photo can inspire some curiosity. What is this lady doing? Why is she peeking into this weird box? What are these wires for? All of those questions are a little more intuitive when they're visual rather than being, punched in the face by a wall of text with all of those acronyms that I talked about earlier. And I think that's really where the power of a visual can come in for science. You can engage with people who might not have access or interest in reading the scientific paper. I think images about science can also challenge some assumptions most people have. Before I became a scientist, I imagined science as sort of like lab coats and test tubes in some sort of fluorescently lit basement or something like that. But really, a lot of science is DIY. It's figuring out problems that you didn't anticipate. It looks like this in this photo. Now, this guy absolutely should have been wearing more PPE, but I don't think he would have appreciated it if someone like me came and told him that because I don't speak Portuguese. So, firstly, that would be impossible. And then, secondly, I think I'm like a third of his age. So, I don't think that would have gone well. And it made for a good photo. So, I wasn't super, he should have been wearing more PPE. Okay, I've said what I need to say about that. But yeah, this photo to me is kind of emblematic of science is often just about overcoming the challenges you face on a daily basis. And this might be my favorite photo that I got from this trip. There's just something about the way that the sparks are bouncing off of his shirt and how unfazed he is that, I don't know, it really speaks to me. We weren't just focused on those man-made reservoirs. We were also looking at the more natural flowing streams and other water bodies. And this machine, called a YSI, is really good for analyzing a lot of different metrics within water. So oxygen content, pH, which is the acidity of the water, and water temperature. All of that you can collect in 5 minutes using this device. Here's another view of that device, just from a different angle. My colleague Leo is precariously balancing on these islands made by these tree roots. And I think this image in particular shows just how difficult it can be to get to some of these locations. I mean, it took us a solid 5 minutes of hopping from island to island to get right here. And all the while, we're wearing these kind of uncomfortable shin guards because the last thing you want in the middle of the forest is to get bitten by a venomous snake. And that's where they tend to bite if they do. So, he is wearing his accurate PPE, and that's great. Uh, but yeah, all of this in the name for some data about water. But this data is super important. It tells us how healthy this stream is, not just in one point, but you can do the same sort of thing at the same stream across several points. So near a farmland, deep in the forest, and everywhere in between. And over several of these data points, you start to understand the stream story and what the stream is going through, how much pollutants are there, how does the temperature change. All of these are really important because those sorts of metrics decide what can live there and what can't. Here's another photo. We took samples from these streams to send home, mainly so we could analyze what sort of nutrient levels are there and what sort of pesticide levels are there in this water, in relation to what I was mentioning earlier about those cloudbursts bringing in pesticides into the streams. I really like this image. It's definitely not the strongest image in my portfolio, but I have a soft spot for it because there's just something about the really high contrast in this syringe and the way that the water is, being squirted out of it. And you have just enough information in the background to know that this is some sort of woods. In real time, what it looked like is there's a lot of shade in the Amazon, and there was just this perfect little patch of light where my colleague was gathering her sample, and I was just like, okay, I need you to pose and do this for me. Here's another clearer picture of what's going on. Basically, what she does is she takes water and she pushes it through that green circle, which is just a filter, and it makes sure that there's no plant material in the sample. And that sample in the vial she's holding is what we send home to analyze further. Yeah, and then this is just a similar style photo with both of my colleagues doing some sort of analysis. One has the YSI, which measures all sorts of variables in the stream, and then the colleague in the background is filtering some water to send home. I think something that really speaks to me, and something that I was really surprised by um, when I was there, is just how close you have to be to your subjects in order to take a photo. Because the moment that you take a step back, the forest just swallows them. So it was really fun and quite the challenge to get interesting shots while actually maintaining focus on the subject. Everything felt very close. I think it's even sort of visible here. Like, look at all of these trees on the background. I had to like fit myself into the perfect little gap in order to get this photo right.
Mitch, can I squeeze in a couple of questions?
Yeah, this is a perfect time.
Okay. So Mika's question is, can you tell us the time frame of all of these? Is this on one expedition or
Yeah,
crossover.
this is all in one expedition. So I was in the forest for about a month. So these photos were taken over that time period. This process went on every single day. So this might have been a few different days all put together. Maybe not though, because I think my colleague is wearing the same shirt. So it might have been all the same day if I'm guessing on that front. But also clothing was minimal. We brought like two outfits for the full trip. So no promises there. But yeah, over the course of that 3 weeks, and then then I went home, sadly.
Yeah. Okay, so Egidio is, we have a camera question. Um, with all the equipment you have to carry, are you using a large camera for these photos?
So at the time, I was using a Nikon D750, which is just a DSLR, and I had three lenses with me. I had a 14 millimeter, a 24 to 70 millimeter, and a 150 to 600 millimeter. And usually, based on what I was doing during the day, I would pick two of the three and leave the third behind. So this I'm 99% sure was taken on the 24 to 70 millimeter. I would usually use the 14 millimeter for night sky shots,
Okay,
and the other two were like my daytime lenses.
okay,
Cool. So yeah, once again, all of these shots, you know, if you were just to read a scientific paper, it would be two sentences. It would be, we gathered material using a YSI. Here are the results. We sent samples home. Here are the results. And while I praise science for its efficiency, it's not always to its benefit to leave out some of these interesting details because, as somebody who's completed this research, so much goes into it. And I think one thing that gets lost in particular is the community element of science. Um, a lot of that gets left on the cutting room floor because when you're writing that scientific paper, it has to be very objective, facts-based, repeatable, so other scientists can go and try and do the same experiment to get hopefully the same results. But when you're in an environment like this, especially when you're off the grid, you become a team very quickly. You're helping each other out with your projects, you're bouncing ideas off of each other. In some scenarios, you're helping somebody out of like a sticky situation. If you get trapped in mud or if you get all wet, you can be the person, it becomes a community. And that gets lost in the sauce. So yeah, somebody shared a birthday and we had a little celebration. Uno, once we got back to our living space, was never met people this competitive about Uno. I probably never will again. I think really the thing that stuck out to me is the friendship of this community and of this experience. I came into this pretty late. It had been going on for 20 years. And the reason that I was brought on for the trip in the first place as a photographer was to document this really auspicious 20-year mark that this research had been going on. And even if I didn't know that going in, it would have become clear really quickly because the bonds that these people share are just really, really heartwarming. The lady on the left, Marcia, she was the head PI, so I reported to her. And then Santarame, they've known the guy in the photo, they've known each other for like decades and decades, and watching them interact and lift each other up. Because the other thing about science is it's can be very frustrating. Sometimes you go in thinking something's going to work and it fails miserably. There's almost always like a point in the project where you realize you've missed some critical, like screwdriver or piece to a process that's like a continent away, and it can be tough without these sort of community bonds. And I do really like this photo because I think the spirit of that community lives in it. But when I put my photographer glasses on, when I put my critical glasses on, it's not that good of a photo. The horizon is not level. The light is really harsh on Marcia's face and on her chin and teeth. Santarame is a little bit too in the shadows. Like if I want to nitpick about the technicalities of this photo, I'd toss it away. But I think that might be part of the importance of this science communication. It's not always about the perfect manicured photo. That wouldn't be true to the experience. It was very muddy and gritty and sweaty throughout. And perhaps most importantly of all, images draw out emotion where a scientific paper or science in general may shy away from emotion. Um, this was Amazon rainforest, is no longer Amazon rainforest. They were in the process of widening this road, and doing so encroaching into the forest. It's one thing to read about deforestation or hear about numbers and how we're losing like ecosystem services and benefits like that. And it's another thing to see it. And that is the power of a photograph. Once again, kind of similar to the photo before, this isn't the technically most stunning photo. It's midday, broad daylight, harsh light, but I think it almost kind of works for this photo given the content. So just really quickly, I think it's really important to go beyond a research paper in an environment like this because it helps round out the story. There's a lot that's left out when you're just looking at the product and not the process. I've got one more case study for you, and that's Western Alaska. This is where I spent 6 months over the summers of 2022 and 2023. And it was one of the most extreme experiences of my life. Um, so, this is an area called the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta, or the YKD for short. And it's just an area where there's the river to the north is the Yukon River, the river to the south is the Kuskokwim River. It's in western Alaska. And this area was about 50 miles away from the nearest town. So we would fly in on a little float plane and land on this lake you see in the bottom left. And we'd pull up to this peninsula. We'd unpack all of our things, food, clothes, scientific equipment, and see you in 3 months. And then we would be on the tundra for 3 months. This is a deceptive photo. It is not usually this nice in the YKD. It's usually very windy and rainy, but on occasion, something nice happens like this. The little tent you see in the bottom right, the white tent with the gray cover on top, was our common tent. That's where we cooked, hung out, woke up in the morning. That's where we went. And then the green tent to its right is our lab tent, and that's where we would process samples and run scientific experiments. This is what the YKD looked like from the plane ride to the location. It's a delta, so it can't really decide whether or not it wants to be water or land. Even when it is land, it's super squishy. You can never trust the tundra is what I used to say because one wrong step and you'd have very wet boots for the next few days. But it's also like when you think about Alaska, or at least when I think about Alaska, this is not what I think about. I think about mountains and forests and grizzly bears, not this sort of landscape. But this is one of the most important landscapes Alaska has, not only because it's a refuge for migratory birds and a breeding ground for migratory birds in the summer. This is also a place that's home to around 50 subsistence villages. So the indigenous population, the Yupik, still live on the land and they face the challenges that come with changing environments and changing climate every day.
Can I interrupt? Because
Yeah.
I don't want you to have to go back too many images.
Yeah.
This is from David. On the
Okay.
image of the lady looking into the box of wires, oh, maybe
Yes.
that's a little way back. I noticed that is a shot through an opening in a wall. Is this done to direct the viewer's attention straight to the subject? He wanted to know, was this a setup or did this occur unintentionally? So he's just curious about your backstory.
That's a great question. I'll go back to the photo.
I'm
I'm actually
sorry.
going to
That was quite a
go.
ways back. Yeah.
No, 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 it's totally good. So actually, this image, this white wall that you see is actually this platform, and the hole is this area right here where this container goes that captures methane gas. So we had these before they were completely set up. They were propped on this table. And I was sort of just sitting fiddling with my camera, and I saw Zoe, and I moved the table, I moved the platform a little bit so she was a little more centered. But this happened pretty organically, where and yes, you're right, I did it to frame the subject, especially since this is a piece of her research in the foreground too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions, or should I keep going?
I've got one, but I'm going to hold it to the end.
Okay. All
And
right.
David was just saying it was an excellent image, so that's what
Oh,
drew his attention to it.
thanks, David. All right. I wanted to go a little bit closer up to the landscapes in Alaska too. And by far the most iconic plant of the tundra is cotton grass, which you see here. There's actually like four or five species at least of cotton grass on the tundra. This one's my favorite, so I chose it to show. Uh, what it looks like on the broader landscape is there are these fields of cotton grass, and it's quite a windy place, the YKD. So a lot of times they would be flowing and moving in the wind in a way that almost looked like a little bit unreal, which that was really, especially the first couple of weeks there, was always a little bit weird walking out of the tent and seeing that. This is at the point of the peninsula, and this is the top half of a reindeer skull. And I kind of felt like this was the most poignant reminder we had of why we were out there in the first place, because reindeer used to go to the YKD for food, and they no longer go there because the habitat has changed to a point where it's not helpful for them to go. So, sort of a reminder of, we're here to evaluate and assess how things have changed and what we can expect in the future. Another really common plant in the YKD is fireweed. If you've ever been to Alaska or even Washington State or Oregon, you've probably seen this. It's like one of the most showy plants, I think, and it was all around us on the tundra. And animals too. You'd almost think with an area like subarctic Alaska that it wouldn't be super lively, but it was just the opposite. All sorts of things, all sorts of creatures lived on that environment. So there was a beaver on the lake that we drew water from, and he would well, the other thing about Alaska is it's never dark outside during the summer. So he was active all the time. If you think it's going to be quiet, think again. It is very loud. He was a part of that. He would slap his tail on the water and it would just echo across the tundra. Also, ptarmigan. These people call them tundra chickens. They make a very funny noise when they fly, almost like it's like if a cartoonist were to make a sound to fit the cartoon of a bird. That's kind of what they sound like. And they're not very smart either. So sometimes they'll do things that you don't expect. They'll fly right at you. Their survival instinct is maybe not the strongest of the bunch. Moose. Yeah, moose were definitely the scariest animal we had to encounter on a daily basis. We also had grizzly bears, but moose are a lot less predictable and a lot dumber than bears. So they are more likely to charge in the middle of nowhere or without like a real reason to do so. So we always kept our distance, but the moose really liked the lake by our campsite because of all of these plants that you see that like pop out of the water. They loved to eat those. And they're just kind of cool guys. As long as you don't bother them, they were kind of a lovely surprise when you could see them from far away. You'll probably smell them before you see them. They have a very pungent odor. It's immediately identifiable. If you smell it, you're going to be like, okay, there has been a moose here, or there's a moose right around the corner. Very stinky animals. And then last but not least, waterfowl. Like I said, this is an area known for its migratory birds. So grebes, ducks, loons, all of them making so much noise every night. Sandhill cranes, I think someone was talking about cranes earlier. Sandhill cranes love the YKD, and you could hear them from every direction almost every night. And then there's the human element to this too. What did it look like for us to be on the tundra? This was my tent that I lived in for what, like 6 months? Yeah, 6 months. This must have been on the shoulder season because it usually doesn't get so dusky in the YKD. But when the sun begins to set, it sort of transforms the whole landscape, especially the sky, which, given that the landscape is so flat, the sky is such a big character in this area. And I think this is one of my favorite sunsets. The texture in the sky and the little bits of orange that pop out from behind the cloud cover, there's something about that that I really like and I think is emblematic of shoulder season work in the Delta. And here's another one. This was a little bit brighter, but the texture in the sky was like routinely just blew my mind. I took this one from the lake. A lot of times I would go on the lake when I wanted to escape the mosquitoes, because I should have said before, the animal that is the most prevalent on this tundra is mosquitoes. They were vicious. There were three types of mosquitoes: medium, big, and small. And the small ones were the fastest, and their bites were also the itchiest. So learned a lot about mosquitoes and how to escape them during my time here. So I think that does a pretty decent job of visualizing what the YKD looked like. But like I said, with the Amazon, it can also provide context to the research. And I said before, my main specialty is plants. It would be remiss of me not to talk about them here. So this plant in the center of the image that looks like it's about to bloom, and the plant that has the sort of maple leaf looking leaves, that's cloudberry. Right next to the stalk of that bloom with those sort of thick, needly looking leaves, that is called Labrador tea. You can actually brew tea from it. I never did it because I think it's like if you do it too much, it's actually really bad for you. But in small doses, you can have that tea as a source of vitamins. And then these oval shaped leaves on the left of the image in the bottom left, those are blueberries. So cloudberries, blueberries, there were tons of other berries too, all in the tundra. So as you worked, you would go and you would pick blueberries and cloudberries and eat them while you worked. And it was definitely the best perk of that job. So the way that we evaluated plants while we were there was using these collars. So like I said before, the ground is really, really moist and really soft. So you can use a bread knife and cut into the soil to push one of these collars down in. And usually we would limit our analysis to the plants that are inside of the collar. So in this case, this was definitely a wetland because there's so many grasses. Once the collar is in the ground, very similar to the Amazon project with collecting methane, the goal here was to evaluate carbon dioxide. So we would put this clear box on top of the collar we put in the ground, and that created an airtight seal. So all of the air inside of that container isn't getting recycled with the rest of the environment. And the orange box here, this sensor is for carbon dioxide. So the tubes that go from the container to the orange box, they would cycle in and out air from that contained environment, and we could get readings on how the carbon dioxide levels were changing. And they always decrease when the box is on top of the collar, because as the sun hits the plants, they photosynthesize, and it takes carbon dioxide in order to photosynthesize. What we were able to do is, across multiple of these measurements, we can see which types of plants are the most efficient at pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It was grasses. Spoiler alert, it was grasses. And then shrubs and lichens were the least efficient. We actually destroyed this instrument like minutes after this photo was taken, and it was a really big deal. So I didn't do it, by the way. It wasn't me, but this was sort of moments before a disaster. The other big thing that we did with the Delta was use these towers, which we call flux towers. And these towers measure all sorts of different variables across the size of a football field. So, temperature, gas exchange from the soil and the plants. It can read carbon dioxide, it can read methane, wind speed, temperature, all sorts of different variables across this football sized field, and they're measured continuously. So, this is an amazing source of data that we can access remotely and add into our analyses. They're not perfect though. They take a lot of maintenance. There's almost always something wrong with the flux tower that requires maintenance. So, here in this photo, somebody is cleaning out one of the sensors to make sure that it's working properly. And I just love these towers because to me, they are what science, like people think science looks like. And in this case, they're right. It's just like gizmos and gadgets all on top of this alien looking tower. But these things are powerhouses. They help us understand how this area changes over time. And furthermore, what those changes are going to mean for the populations that live in the area. A few behind the scenes things from this research too. The tundra was so treacherous to walk on that half the time it was easier to just walk through the lake. So we would put our waders on, put all of our gear in an inflatable raft, and push the raft to the other side of the lake so that we could access further away research sites. And the lake walks were like my favorite part of the whole trip. It's just really magical. The soil or the substrate in the lake is like super squishy. So sometimes you would take a step and then you would step too far or too hard and then you'd get like stuck in the lake. It was a good time. Camp itself, I feel like is sort of a behind the scenes thing. For, at least from a scientific perspective, you're never going to hear about when our solar panel malfunctioned and we had to worry about power for a few days, or the fact that there were leeches in the lake, so you can't swim in the lake, you can't bathe, you can't drink the water directly. All of our water had to be filtered. There's going to be no mention of the boardwalk that all of these little boards and plastic things. We tried our best to not step on the plants as best as we can, to not degrade the environment too much. All of these things are really critical to the process, but maybe not so much the product. And then inside the common tent, this is where we spent the bulk of our time when we weren't working. And it's sheer chaos, as you can see. All of our belongings are strung up in these gallon-sized plastic bags. Our food are in these totes, which also double as tables. Our cooking gear is in the corner on those shelves. Our trash can, our scientific gear, backpacks, shoes, all of it. Oh, the camera's there too. Somebody took this photo of me. Um, all of it goes into this experience. And then this is the float plane that took us back and forth from our field sites. And those things that look like skis on the bottom are how it was able to land in the water safely. And then one final image from a little bit of time we had in town. I think this is what better example could you have of the changes that are going on in this environment as the permafrost thaws and the ground sinks and the water level rises in an area that's already pretty close to sea level, you begin to get structural difficulties in these communities. And actually, at least one or two communities since I left that particular organization have had to be relocated because of fear of major flooding incidents. So the research that gets completed, it's sort of, there's like a duality to it because on one hand, when you read a scientific paper or talk to a scientist, very often it's impartial, non-judgmental, objective, but these are also very, very emotionally charged, difficult realities that you need to grapple with and that the data grapples with. So there's some push and pull, and part of me feels like photography is that key ingredient to making sure that the emotion surrounding the science is actually accounted for because it's very much there. Something that I've been thinking about recently and I haven't really made up my mind on it, is which one should come first, information or inspiration? I feel like most of what I showed you today is sort of information first. We had a scientific experiment. Here are the photos that supplement that experiment. And that's great and can be helpful. But I think there's also potential for inspiration to come first. Potentially, you see a photo of an environment that you've never seen before, and that's what draws you in. And then you start learning about the science. And this is, I think, where some of my more like prototypical landscape and wildlife photography can come in, because all of the photos that I'm going to show you next have inspired me to take a closer look at these landscapes and to appreciate them more, and hopefully could have the same effect on others who may not otherwise be interested. So this photo of mine from Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado is one of my favorite photos I've ever taken, and it has no scientific tie. It's just a photo that I think is really lovely. Um, I was there at the gosh, must have been September of 2024. And it was just the perfect sunset. Like the sun was setting through this hazy bank of clouds and it cast this very soft light on the dunes. These dunes are usually sort of tan and now they're pink and purple and blue. Like how magical is that? And I was just really struck by the S curve in the foreground of the image, this sort of dune to dune to dune. All of those curves are just really cool and kind of hard to find in other areas of nature. And then the textures too. I actually received a critique of this work. Somebody said that I should get rid of the texture of the dune in the very front with those bits of sand that had fallen down. And I thought about that a lot, and I thought about trying to remove them in post-processing, but I actually think I really like them because there's so many varied textures to the sand that you can see across this image, and I didn't really want to get rid of it. Here's another one of the dunes, I think from a different trip. Um, I I really like it when a landscape is sort of an optical illusion or in some way abstract. It takes me a second, even after taking the image, to figure out like how things are lined up. Like, okay, there must be like a really steep dune in the background and the flowers are growing out of that dune. But on first glance, it almost just looks like there's a wall in the background. And I really like that effect. I layered, this is a focus stacked image, two images. There's the foreground, and then I focus stacked the background so that most of the image was in focus. I left the little triangle in the on the left-hand side unfocused. There's something about that s- feels more true to the environment. It was a really windy day also, so all of the sand was sort of whipping and creating this glowy effect that I really, really liked. Here's another one that feels a little bit abstract to me. This one's just down the road from me in Colorado. But the thing that struck me about this image was just how close the sky was to the color of the bark on the aspen trees. And despite the fact that this is a very chaotic image, there's a lot of like branches going back and forth and so many trees in focus. Something about the almost monochromatic color palette. This is a color image. It's not black and white, but it almost feels black and white. There's something paired with that simplicity and then the chaos of the structure of the branches that I was really drawn to, and I'm not sure I can really articulate more about why. This image, oh, Moab is such a cool area, and I feel very lucky that I'm pretty close by. And I this is of the Fisher Towers, which is just north of Moab on the scenic byway. And it's a pretty recent find. I took this photo a couple months ago, and it was right at sunset. The sun was just on the horizon, and it just cast this unbelievable red light onto these already red rocks. And I mean, I did just the most minimal color correction in post-processing. Like this is pretty true to form. And as beautiful as I think this image is, and I really love this image, it doesn't even come close to what it was like in person. Um, but there's something about an image like this that makes me feel really proud of the environment we have in the United States. And makes me feel connected to this place that I'm a pretty recent transplant to. I haven't been here all that long in Colorado, but it already kind of feels like home because of things like this. This one is very close to home. This is in the Colorado National Monument, which is 15 minutes away from my house in Grand Junction. And this is one of the first photos that I took upon moving here. Um, and I just saw this stretch of road from higher up on the monument. And I thought it would be a really cool idea to try and get some sort of light painting effect at night because so many people go on joyrides through the monument at night. I felt like I might have a chance to actually get a full stretch of road lit up. And it just so happened that the night that I went out to try that, there was a full moon. It was a pink moon. It was like so pink. I don't actually know why. And it cast this really lovely glow onto the landscape. It wasn't as visible in person, but with a 4 minute exposure time, um, it showed up in the landscape, and it was really lovely. Also, I think people really treasure the monument in Grand Junction, and that's great because it's not always that way. Sometimes these things get taken for granted, and it gives me a lot of pride to know how much Grand Junction really cares about this place. And yeah, this image is one of my favorites since I've moved here. I think maybe of anything naturally that might inspire somebody to be interested in the environment. Paradoxically, it's not really a part of our environment. I think the night sky is something that really speaks to a lot of people, even though, all the stars could disappear and we would still need to do some work on planet Earth. But this is Delicate Arch in Arches National Park. I spent months and months planning this shot because getting the Milky Way to fall through the arch, you only have a few weekends that you can actually get that done. And it was peak fire season in the West, so there was a little bit of concern about smoke. But it ended up working out. Last year, I was able to get this shot, and usually I don't include people in my photos if it's like more inspiration based rather than information based. But I actually have come to really love the silhouette of the person underneath the arch because I think it gives such a feel for the scale of this place and how enormous this world is. Um, and then even the little bit of light pollution there is in the bottom right from Moab, the town, that almost adds something to me too, because it's such a contrast, that yellowy orange to the sort of pale blues. Um, yeah, I'm quite fond of this image. And then back to the Fisher Towers because it's my most recent obsession. There's something about that little triangle rock at the top of this structure that just drives me insane in the best way. Like it is so cool to me that rocks can erode in that way and that nature creates these funky shapes for us. And there's some other funky shapes in this image too. Like it's almost like melting candle wax. And as I was going to get that drone shot that I showed earlier, I noticed that this particular rock structure, if you face the right direction, is due north. So I came back later to get this photo of the star trails with that little point as close to the center of the star trail as possible. And luckily for me, I found a pretty decent foreground to accompany the image with all of this scattered rocks and low shrubs to kind of give scale to the magnitude of the rock structure. I really like including a lot of foreground elements in my night sky shots because while I love the night sky, I think it looks even better in context within a landscape, and I'm quite pleased with how this one turned out. Okay, enough landscapes. If you're not a landscape person, you can applaud because no more landscapes, all wildlife from here. I took this photo of a couple tree swallows absolutely duking it out for a living space a few years ago, and it remains one of my favorite bird photos, even though it's not the crispest, it's not the sharpest, but there's just something about that bird with his mouth open, screaming at his competitor that really just makes me chuckle. And the shape of the wings on the bird on top I don't know. There's just something about that to me that makes me really happy. It's also my phone background, so I see it every single day. This grizzly bear cub, I took this photo in Grand Tetons National Park, and he was just doing the prototypical iconic bear thing, and he was scratching his back on this tree, and he looked so cute, and his paws were so delicately placed like this. It was just sometimes you just get lucky and you happen to have your lens out at the right time, and this was one of those situations. But even if it's something that isn't so grandiose, it doesn't have to be a big animal. It doesn't have to be like a grizzly bear or a colorful bird. Even this little song sparrow, which I took a photo of in Indiana, to me, this is still very inspiring to see him in his natural habitat on all of these sort of rotten, dead reeds. I don't know. There's just something about this too, the smaller elements and the simpler elements of nature that um, even still can be quite inspiring. And then lastly, a little bighorn sheep kid that I took on the national monument. These guys are all over Western Colorado. They're kind of the iconic species, and the babies are just so cute, and they're sort of not the most coordinated. So this one just, it hadn't quite finished its meal, and it was docile enough to where I could get a pretty close-up photo. I really like the texture on his forehead. All of that fur is really in focus, and I almost feel like I could like reach into the image and like feel what that coarse hair would feel like. So yeah, just a little final recap of all of this. Environmental research is really, really important, but it's not all encompassing. There are things that scientists aren't trained to do, don't have the time or interest to do, or maybe just don't have the outlet to do. That doesn't mean those things aren't important. In fact, especially when it comes to environmental issues, this might be a hot take, but I'm going to say it. We have a lot of the science that we need to know that some things need to change. That's no longer the limiting factor in terms of what do we need to do in order to protect our environment. Now it's a little bit more on the action side of things rather than the research side. Now, how do we bridge that gap? It certainly isn't going to be a paper talking about psychrometric constants and vapor pressure deficit and evapotranspiration. As cool as all of those things are to me, that's not the case for the broader public. So we need to have strategies as scientists to visualize this research and communicate it a little bit more clearly. I think photography is one tool among a larger toolkit that can help tell that story. And then the question that I'm still wondering about and trying to figure out is which one should come first? Should it be information? Should it be inspiration? A mix of both? I have a feeling the answer is sort of nowhere or in between because some people are going to be interested in the numbers and the hard data. Other people are going to be interested in the emotion and the visuals. But this is a group project. This is the biggest group project the country has ever seen, maybe the globe has ever seen. Um, so we shouldn't, we need to cover all of our bases. Thank you all so much for listening. If you want to keep in contact, like Linda said, my Instagram is at Mitch Korolev. It's the best thing about having a unique name is I get all of the emails and the handles all to myself, which is awesome. My website is korolevphotography.com. You can see more of my things there. Um, it is constantly under construction, and I will put more up and change things. It is so you can follow along just for the journey of watching me fumble my way through website development, which is absolutely not my strong suit. And then if you want to send me an email about anything, be it photography or science or a question about something you saw online about science, let me know. Send me an email at mitchkorolev@gmail.com and I will get back to you once I'm back on the grid, whenever that may be. That's all I have for tonight. So hopefully there's a little time to ask questions or just chat afterwards. And thanks again, everybody, for coming.
All right. Let me ask you to okay, you're way
Oh,
ahead. That no, 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 you're good. I was gonna say, can you
Okay.
take your screen down because I'm going to big in our screens here. Um, all right, I'm gonna scroll through here. I've got a question for you, and it comes from
Yeah.
Mika, who I want you to go look at her work because she is a macro photographer, and her favorite subjects, I'm speaking for you, Mika, are insects. And I think that you would be fascinated to see what her world is. Um, all right. Our question for you is, do you enjoy being a photographer or a scientist more? And how do you balance that?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. It kind of changes on the day, to be honest with you. I would say most of the time I enjoy being a photographer more because there are less um, constraints on me when I'm a photographer compared to when I'm a scientist. When I'm a scientist, there's a lot of things that I have to do, and when I'm a photographer, there's a lot of things that I get to choose to do, and that is um, I think the biggest difference. But they are sort of the same coin, just two different sides for me. The reason that I became a scientist and the reason that I became a photographer originate both from my fascination and love for the outdoors. So in some ways, it's just interacting with the same set of mediums, just in a little bit different way. So I'm thankful for both of them. Really thankful for both of them.
Okay. All right, Mitch, I'm going to say this, and I'm not saying anything clever or original here because the chat you have, I'm going to share the chat with you. There are
Okay.
some really, I told you earlier, don't be afraid. They're really nice people. They won't eat you alive. I'm the only one you need to be scared of. Um, you have so many nice compliments in the chat.
Wow.
And I'm going to echo, this was fascinating to me. Um, science was not that was not my favorite subject. It was way, way too much more than I could comprehend. And then you made that legit for me when you talked about leeches. And I'm like, I'm totally out. And then
Yeah.
when you said, it might have been day 42 of you having a shower. So I'm totally out. But from sitting on this side and looking at your photos and for you to walk us through what you're doing and what your colleagues are doing and sacrificing to get this information to make our world a little bit better somehow, it's gonna hit and it resonates with people. But from the back row, I always like to say, this is fascinating to me.
Oh,
And how you guys um, take the information and put it where you need to put it and break it down. And I mean, I'm sure you have to do this a lot, but you were a wonderful, wonderful presenter. You didn't, I didn't feel like you dumbed it down for me. You just made it interesting. And you had me right at some of those first photos. And I'm thinking, all right, this is the backstory of somebody, this is what you do every day. I cannot relate. And of course, when you jump to the inspiration, I'm all over that. I'm all over that because, I think what sets your presentation apart from you are number 280 tonight. This is
oh, really?
280
Oh, wow.
presentations. And what sets you apart from the 279 but that came before you is that there it wasn't just about the pretty pictures and the backstories. There's some meat to what you're doing and how you apply it, how your work overlaps your playtime and your creativity. And I just find you fantastic. So I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
people. This is for me.
Oh,
We say it all the time. This is Linda's selfish hour. It's not just the happiness hour, it's selfish hour. But I'm not alone tonight. Y'all have overused the word fascinating in the chat, but this was fantastic, and thank you for taking the time to share what you do and
yeah.
to put us kind of I don't want to say in your boots because, squishy water, walking across, like that's when you said that was like the best part of your day. I thought, dude, and I have nothing in common, not anything in common. But man, this was fun. This is really, really fun. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm
Yeah,
reading all of these comments right now, and they are all so,
yeah.
so nice.
I
And
told you they're very nice. And
this
don't
is,
worry,
yeah,
I'll share this with you so you'll have it. I want to thank you again for coming and sharing. I don't see any of
yeah.
the questions. If I missed something, I'm like, sorry guys, but I don't really see anything. I think you might be the smartest person in the room tonight.
Oh, I don't know about that. I feel like I'm surrounded by really smart people, and I
Yeah.
constantly feel like I'm running to catch up. So
Well,
I don't know.
you own it tonight. You own it here.
All
All
right.
right. All right. Next week, Ben Cowan will be here to share his presentation, Composing for Connections. So y'all have a nice night, and we'll see you next week.